Hey everyone, I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying upload. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more of the content you love. I re-downloaded Tinder again. I had deleted it a few months back after a string of truly awful dates, but figured maybe my luck would finally change. I swiped mindlessly for a bit until a familiar face popped up that made me stop in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it was my ex-girlfriend, Katie. There was no mistaking that smile, those bright blue eyes, the cute freckle on her left cheek. It was the exact same profile picture she had used when we were together. I couldn't believe it. We had broken up over a year ago and she moved across the country to California for a new job. What were the chances she moved back to our hometown without telling me? My cursor hovered over her profile, wondering if I should swipe right. Katie and I didn't exactly have an amicable breakup. I wanted to try long distance, but she refused, insisting it would change the dynamic of our relationship. Her new job was a dream opportunity, so I didn't want to hold her back. But maybe this was fate giving us a second chance? Before I could overthink it too much, I impulsively swiped right and got the "It's a Match" notification seconds later. My mind raced trying to think of the perfect opening line. I finally settled on asking how her fancy new job was going in California, figuring that was a safe conversation starter. Her response wasn't quite what I expected. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've lived here my whole life," she wrote back simply. Strange, I thought. Maybe she got a new job locally instead of moving? When I asked for clarification, she said, "You must have me confused with someone else." Now I was really puzzled. This was definitely Katie. She looked identical to her old pictures. Why was she being coy about our past relationship? I tried asking light questions about where she went to high school and other hometown memories we shared, but she skillfully evaded or deflected each one. Her responses were courteous but vague, never revealing anything substantial. She claimed to have grown up in our city, but couldn't name any specific places or people when I probed further. Eventually, I point blank asked if she used to date me. "Sorry, I think you have the wrong person," was all she wrote back. I was starting to get frustrated and honestly a little disturbed. Was this some kind of weird mind game? Or did she really not remember me at all? The only logical explanation was that something traumatic happened, causing her to block out huge chunks of memory. But how would that explain recreating her old Tinder profile perfectly? Her photos, bio, everything was exactly the same as I recalled. Either Katie was messing with me or this person was literally her doppelganger. In a last-ditch effort, I asked Katie to meet up so we could figure this out in person. She ignored my request at first, but I kept pushing for answers. Finally, she agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town the next evening. I spent the next 24 hours trying to prep what I would say to jog her memory. I pulled out old photos of us together, sappy love notes she had written me, even a shirt of mine she used to sleep in. I wasn't letting her get away with pretending not to know me this time. She owed me some answers, even if the truth was hard to hear. The next night I arrived early and grabbed a table by the window so I could watch for her arrival. Every girl that walked in made my heart stop, wondering if it could be Katie. But the minutes ticked by, and eventually it was 30 minutes past the time we were supposed to meet. I texted asking if she was running late, but got no response. I waited another agonizing 20 minutes before I had to face the facts. She wasn't showing up. My sadness quickly turned to frustration. This wasn't like the Katie I knew at all. Even if she had forgotten me, she wasn't the type to just stand someone up without a word. I had to get to the bottom of this. On the drive back home, I resolved to stop by her old house that we used to share before she moved. Maybe seeing some of her old belongings would jog my own memory and put this confusing reunion in perspective. I pulled up to the small blue house and felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. All the lights were off, so I walked around to the backyard. Peering in the window, nothing looked familiar. The furniture was all different now. Just then my foot bumped something in the grass. I looked down to see a cell phone laying on the ground. Picking it up, the lock screen wallpaper made my heart drop. It was a selfie of Katie and I from years ago that I remembered taking. This was her old phone. It still had a big crack in it from when she dropped it at a party. But why was it just abandoned in the backyard? My hands shook as I pressed the home button, not even sure what I hoped to find. The screen opened to Tinder, still logged into her account. That's when it hit me. Someone must have stolen this old phone and was using it to recreate her profile. Who knows how they got her other photos and personal details, but it clearly wasn't actually Katie I had been messaging. She likely had no idea any of this was happening. I felt violated on Katie's behalf, knowing someone was impersonating her online. I reported the account to Tinder immediately, hoping they could track down whoever was behind this sick prank. Tossing the phone back in the grass, I walked away from that house even more confused than when I arrived. I still missed the real Katie, even after all this time. But this bizarre encounter made me realize maybe some chapters are better left closed. Driving home, I grappled with whether I should try to contact the real Katie to warn her, but we hadn't spoken in over a year and our last conversation was painful. In the end, I decided it wasn't my place to insert myself into her new life. I'd have to trust that she would see through the deception if this person ever reached out to her. Exhausted by the emotional roller coaster, I plopped into bed and stared at the ceiling. I replayed memories of my time with Katie. Our 3 years together flickered through my mind like an old movie reel. The happiness, the passion, the inevitable cracks in the foundation. As much as it stung, in hindsight our split was probably for the best. We wanted different things. Still, she was an important part of my journey. I'll always cherish the memories we made. But this bizarre catfishing encounter made me realize maybe some chapters are better left closed. Enough time had been wasted chasing ghosts from my past. It was time to look ahead to the future, and maybe one day I'd find someone new when the time was right. But for now, I had to let go of the tantalizing idea that Katie and I were meant to reconnect. As much as it stung, that ship had sailed long ago, and nothing could bring it back. At least now I had some closure after this strange detour. Time to swim forward down the river of life and see where the tides take me next. It all started so innocently. I was new to online dating and decided to give Tinder a try. After swiping through some profiles, I matched with Laura. Her photos showed a tall, stunning woman with warm eyes and a kind smile. When we started chatting, it felt like we were kindred spirits. We liked the same books, movies, and TV shows. She even cracked the inside jokes my friends and I shared. I felt like I had known Laura my whole life. Our conversations flowed effortlessly and soon progressed to texting throughout the day. Laura always knew the perfect thing to say to make me smile. She remembered little details about my life that I had casually mentioned and would reference them later to show she was paying attention. I started looking forward to our daily chats and could feel myself falling for her. About 3 weeks after we had matched, Laura mentioned my favorite cafe that I often went to between classes. I was surprised she knew about it since I didn't remember telling her the name. When I asked how she knew, she joked that she must be psychic. I laughed it off at the time, but something about the interaction planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Over the next few days, Laura made a couple more comments that revealed her knowledge of my routine and whereabouts. The seed of doubt grew into full-fledged suspicion. I finally confronted Laura and demanded to know how she knew so much about me when we had never met in person. After trying to brush it off again, she finally confessed. Laura admitted that she had first seen me around campus months ago and had immediately become obsessed. She created fake social media accounts to follow me online and had even followed me in person to learn my habits. I felt sick to my stomach as she described the lengths she had gone to in order to learn everything about me before we had even matched. I told Laura in no uncertain terms that she needed to leave me alone and then immediately blocked and reported her. I hoped that would be the end of the creepy situation, but over the next few weeks, new profiles kept popping up with variations of Laura's name and photos. No matter how many times I blocked the accounts, more just kept appearing. My phone blew up at all hours with messages from Laura under different aliases. She claimed she needed me in her life, and we were destined to be together. I was terrified that Laura was ramping up her disturbing stalking behavior. The messages became more frantic, and she referenced things I had done or places I had gone to that same day. She was clearly tracking my every move somehow. I filed a report with campus security and the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do at that point. I became hypervigilant, constantly looking over my shoulder when I left my dorm or apartment. I refused to go anywhere alone. Even broad daylight with people all around offered no peace of mind. This carried on for weeks until suddenly the messages and fake accounts just stopped. After a few days with no sign of Laura, I finally began to relax. I managed to push the traumatic experience to the back of my mind in an effort to move on, regained my sense of normalcy over the next few months. I went back to my usual habits and routines, no longer anxiously checking over my shoulder everywhere I went. My friends helped me feel safe again with our hangouts and walks around campus during the day. I even started dating someone I met in class, a kind psychology major named Brian. When I felt ready to give online dating another try, I re-downloaded Tinder. Brian and I had recently broken up, so I was looking forward to putting myself back out there. As I swiped through potential matches, a familiar face popped up. Laura. Her warm smile in the pictures now seemed chilling and sinister. My finger shook as I selected the options to block and report her new fake account. How did she find me again? Just as I thought I was finally free, the nightmare returned. Over the next few days, no new messages or profiles appeared. I didn't see any signs of Laura as I went about my routine. Maybe she had actually moved on this time. I tried to convince myself. Then one night, as I studied in the library, I noticed a dark figure lurking between the stacks. A hat was pulled down, obscuring her face, but something about the tall, broad frame seemed familiar. My heart dropped as I gathered my things and rushed back to my room. The next morning, I awoke to find my social media flooded with messages from Laura. She described my clothing from the night before in detail and said she loved watching me study. Attached was a photo of myself in the library, taken from between the rows of books. I knew the police needed to get involved again. This was no longer just online harassment, but full-blown stalking. As I dialed, my hands shaking, I realized my nightmare was starting again. But this time, I was determined to stop Laura for good. The police arrived quickly, and I showed them the disturbing messages and photo from Laura. They asked if I had any idea how she kept finding me online and in person. That's when I remembered the day Laura came over briefly when my roommate was out. She must have planted a tracking app on my phone or devices. The police helped me sweep my apartment, and sure enough, hidden in an air vent was a small camera and microphone. Laura had been watching and listening to me for months. I felt violated, but also relieved that we finally found solid evidence against her. With the help of campus security, the police tracked down Laura and arrested her. They discovered a detailed journal in her possessions describing her stalking activities and obsession with me. Finally, the nightmare was over. I decided to share my story to help others who find themselves targeted by online predators. There is help available. You just need to reach out. Technology may have connected us in new ways, but it also exposed me to a disturbed criminal. Stay vigilant out there and know the warning signs so you can take action before it's too late. As for me, I think I'll take a break from online dating. I'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship and decided to dip my toe into online dating. Friends recommended the app Tinder, so I downloaded it and created a basic profile with a few cute photos of myself and a short bio about liking hiking, yoga, and live music. After a few days of swiping, I matched with a guy named Matt. He seemed nice enough at first glance. Tall, dark hair, bright blue eyes, and a warm smile. His photos showed him skiing, hanging out with friends, and dressed up for a wedding. We started chatting on the app and really hit it off. He told me about his job as an accountant, his hobby of landscape photography, and his dream of visiting Iceland someday. He seemed to have a good sense of humor and some similar interests like fitness and trying new restaurants. After a couple weeks of nonstop messaging, Matt finally asked me out on a proper date. He suggested dinner at his apartment that Saturday night. At first I hesitated since meeting at someone's home can be risky, but he assured me he just found it more intimate than a loud, crowded restaurant on a weekend. And we'd been talking so much I felt like I knew him well enough to be comfortable. So I agreed to the at-home date idea. That Saturday evening, I nervously smoothed my little black dress and knocked on Matt's door. When he opened it, he looked just like his photos, tall and handsome with those piercing blue eyes and a warm smile. His apartment was clean but cluttered in a typical bachelor pad kind of way. We started cooking dinner together in the small kitchen while sipping wine. As we chatted and chopped vegetables for pasta primavera, I caught a few subtle signs of a potential roommate. An extra toothbrush in the bathroom. A few items of women's clothing tossed over a chair. I considered it a bit odd, but didn't think too much of it. Maybe he had a sister or female friend who crashed here occasionally. But over dinner, I noticed a few more signs. Candles and romance novels on the shelves I knew Matt wouldn't have. Feminine shampoo and soap in the shower. I jokingly asked if he had a roommate I should know about. He just laughed it off, saying he lived alone. I shrugged it off, but the signs kept nagging me. Who did that stuff belong to? As the evening went on, I felt increasingly uneasy being there alone with Matt. I decided I should get home as it was getting late. But when I said I should leave, Matt's mood drastically changed. He became insistent I stay, opening another bottle of wine and suggesting we watch a movie. I firmly declined and reached for my purse to leave, but he blocked my path to the door. Panic started rising in my chest as he hovered over me, refusing to let me pass. I threatened to call my friends to come get me if he didn't back down. Finally, he begrudgingly stepped aside, but his blue eyes blazed with anger now instead of warmth. I raced out of there, heart pounding, and vowed to never see Matt again. But the mystery of the possible roommate nagged me. After a few days, I did some deep digging online. What I found made my blood turn to ice. There were reports of half a dozen young women matching my age and look who had gone missing in the area over the past 2 years. All of them were last heard from after going to meet up with Matt from Tinder. The signs of another woman in his apartment weren't from an actual roommate, they were trophies collected from Matt's previous victims. Mementos from dates who had unwittingly walked into the lion's den, never to emerge again. I shuddered to think how close I came to potentially joining those missing women. Ever since that harrowing experience, I'm much more cautious about online dating. I only agree to meet for a first date in a very public place now, and I always make sure my friends know where I'm going and who I'm meeting beforehand. What I thought would be an exciting foray into dating after my breakup very nearly turned into my own real-life nightmare. I never heard from or saw Matt again, but I'll always vividly remember those subtle, ominous signs in his apartment. The feminine toiletries that didn't belong to him. The venomous look in his eyes when I tried to leave. The realization that his charming online persona was a facade hiding something much more sinister. Wherever those poor missing women ended up, I'm grateful I narrowly avoided potentially joining them that evening. After that near miss, I'm sticking to meeting any potential romantic partners strictly in crowded, well-lit locations from now on. No more going straight to a guy's home on the first date, no matter how nice he may seem over messages. My experience with Matt was a terrifying reminder that you truly never know someone until you meet them in person. I'm just thankful I listened to my instincts and got out of there before finding out what other dangers that supposedly friendly stranger may have been hiding in his apartment. Online dating can seem fun and exciting, but it also carries risks. Always put safety first, value your intuition in an uncomfortable situation, and don't ignore those subtle warning signs. They could end up saving your life, like they did for me. My night with Matt didn't end in tragedy, but it easily could have if not for pure luck. From now on, for any first dates with online strangers, I choose life. It started out as just another night of swiping on Tinder. I was sitting on my couch, phone in hand, breezing through profiles. Most were instant left swipes, blurry selfies, gym mirrors, fish pics. But then I came across one that gave me pause. The main picture was dimly lit, showing only the silhouette of a woman with long dark hair. Her face was completely obscured by shadows. Something about it felt off, almost sinister. But curiosity got the better of me and I swiped right. We matched immediately, and a chat window opened up. No message, just an ellipsis showing she was typing. I waited a few minutes, but nothing came through. I shrugged it off and went back to swiping. Over the next hour, I matched with a few other women and chatted normally back and forth, but the eerie silhouette profile kept nagging at me from the match list. I clicked back into the chat window, still empty. I typed out a message. "Hey, how's it going?" But erased it without sending. I didn't know why, but I felt uneasy engaging with this shadowy figure. I decided to just unmatch and move on. However, when I hit the unmatch button, I got an error message. Weird. I tried closing the app and reopening it, but the match was still there. Glitchy app. I put my phone down and tried to forget about it. But the next evening, I had a notification from her. The cryptic message simply said, David. David was my best friend from high school, who I hadn't talked to in years. How did she know about him? I stared bewildered at the glowing screen. Over the next week, she sent me a series of random names through Tinder messages. They were all people I knew. Old neighbors, CO workers, a cousin. Never any context or explanation, just a first name dropped into the chat, then silence again. I became paranoid, questioning my memory. Were these names she could have gleaned from my social media, or were they deeper connections that couldn't be found online? I stopped opening Tinder, but it didn't stop the notifications from popping up on my lock screen, each displaying a new unsettling message. Sam, Jessica, Claire. They were coming more frequently now, progressing from old acquaintances to close family members. Late one night, I was startled awake by a chime from my phone. I tentatively unlocked it, stomach dropping when I read her newest message. It contained only my home address. Nothing else, just 10 digits that pinpointed my location exactly. I wanted to go to the police, but what would I even tell them? A faceless Tinder match somehow knew where I lived and was sending me creepy messages? They'd think I was crazy or seeking attention. I didn't sleep that night, obsessively checking the windows and doors. The next evening, my phone lit up again with a message from the same chilling chat window. Next was all it said. Next? Next what? Next victim? I felt sick imagining the possibilities. I decided I needed to factory reset my phone, maybe even get a new device altogether. As I dug through settings, trying desperately to sever any connection, another message popped up, longer this time. 19,573 Brook Pines Road. Tonight. I froze. That was my childhood home, empty for years now since my parents moved away. What kind of sick game was this? I threw some clothes haphazardly into a bag and got in my car. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from this place. As I sped off into the night, glimpsing the shadowy figure of a woman on the side of the road made my stomach drop. Was she watching me this whole time? Tracking my real-world movements as I tried in vain to escape our digital connection? I drove for hours until I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open. I pulled into a rest stop and reclined the driver's seat, hoping sleep would make this all feel like a bad dream. But just as I drifted off, I heard the chime of a new Tinder notification on my passenger seat, where my phone lay. Heart pounding, I tentatively reached for it and read the glowing words, "Rest well tonight, we have a big day tomorrow." I jolted awake in a cold sweat, frantically looking around the darkened rest stop. Just a nightmare. My phone sat silently next to me, its black screen almost taunting me, daring me to turn it on. I couldn't bring myself to do it. The first rays of dawn were breaking through the clouds as I pulled back onto the highway. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away as possible. Mile after mile I drove, the events of the past week playing over and over in my mind. Had I imagined it all? Or was there really someone or something out there threatening me through my phone? Exhaustion eventually took over and I stopped at a motel outside a small rural town. Using a borrowed phone, I called my brother and, without going into detail, told him I was laying low for a while. He didn't ask for specifics, just offered his guest room and wished me well. I slept at the motel that night with the lights on. The next morning I continued my journey, arriving at my brother's farmhouse late that evening. His presence made me feel safer, but I still couldn't shake the ominous words from that final message. Over the next few weeks I started feeling like myself again. I was still on edge, but the horror of that Tinder match was finally fading. One peaceful morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about it all the previous day. Just like that, it was suddenly a distant memory rather than an ever-present terror. Maybe someday I'll find out what was behind those messages. For now, I'm just grateful to feel normal again. My phone remains off, and I avoid anything that reminds me of that twisted digital world. The past is the past. I'm focusing on the future now, here in the quiet countryside, far from the unsettling mysteries lurking within innocent-looking apps. For the first time in ages, I feel totally safe. Looking back now, I realize I should have seen the signs. But hindsight is 20/20th, and at the time I was just excited to connect with someone who seemed so perfect for me. We matched on Tinder 3 months ago. Dan was attractive, local, and we shared so many of the same interests. Our conversations flowed easily, and he always knew exactly what to say to make me smile. After 2 weeks of constant messaging, I felt like I really knew him. When I suggested we meet up for a drink, though, he balked. Said he liked to take things slow when meeting people from the internet. I was a little disappointed, but understood not everyone was ready to meet strangers right away. So we kept talking. He sent me selfies from his apartment, each shot framed slightly differently. On the couch, in the kitchen, out on his balcony. I started looking forward to his photos popping up, showing me snapshots of his life. About a month in, something in one of the photos caught my eye. In the background was a wall covered in photos of me. There I was, grabbing coffee, walking to my car, even pictures taken through the window of my apartment. Shocked, I zoomed in on the images. He must have been following me and taking photos without my knowledge for weeks. Casually, I asked him about the pictures. He read my message but never responded. I realized then I had never told him my real name, where I worked, or other personal details about my life. Yet somehow he had identified me and tracked me down. I immediately deleted and blocked him on Tinder. My hands shook as the reality of the situation sunk in. This man I had been speaking to intimately for weeks had been stalking me the entire time. I was terrified but tried to convince myself it was over now that I had cut contact. I double-checked the security settings on all my social media accounts, set my profiles to private, changed my daily routes and routines, always made sure to look over my shoulder when I was out. A week later, I was leaving a coffee shop when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a hoodie-clad figure duck into an alley, but not before I caught a glimpse of his face. It was Dan. He was still following me. I broke down into tears right there on the sidewalk, feeling violated and scared. Why was he doing this? What did he want from me? That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump out of bed to check the door was locked. Peeking through the blinds, I scanned for any sign of him lurking outside my apartment. The next day, exhausted and rattled, I skipped work to file a report with the police. They took down all the details and said they would look into it, but the photos themselves weren't enough evidence for them to do much. I could tell they didn't think it was a big deal, but it was to me. I no longer felt safe in my own home, my own city. I found myself questioning every new person I met. What if Dan had friends who were also watching me? I withdrew from social plans, avoided crowded areas, stopped posting on social media altogether. Weeks turned into months. The police never found Dan. I considered moving, changing my name, altering my appearance so he couldn't recognize me if we ever crossed paths again. I was a shell of myself, no longer recognizable as the happy, outgoing person I was before. My friends tried to be supportive, but eventually grew tired of my paranoia. Just forget about him and move on, they told me. They didn't understand how deeply this had affected me, changed my very sense of security in the world. I found myself pulling away from them too, avoiding the judging looks and dismissive comments. Alone in my hypervigilance, I continued living half a life. I switched to only online classes for school, having panic attacks anytime I had to sit in a classroom with strangers behind me. Grocery delivery replaced my evening store visits. My world got smaller and smaller as I receded further into isolation. In retrospect, there were signs early on that something wasn't right. Taking it too slow, refusing to meet up. The selfies that showed just a little too much of his apartment. But I was too caught up in the fairy tale romance I thought we were building. All the things we had in common, our effortless conversations. I mistook them for intimacy when really it was fabrication based on his weeks of learning my habits and interests while following me invisibly through my life. I still double-check for unfamiliar cars or faces around my neighborhood. Still get jittery walking alone or sitting with my back to a door in public. But I'm starting therapy and trying to move forward. Rebuild my life one day at a time so fear doesn't rule me anymore. And most importantly, I will never ignore those warning signs again. My safety is too important to sacrifice, even for a seemingly perfect connection. I hope my story can help someone else avoid the traumatic experience I went through. Stay vigilant and trust your instincts. Getting to know someone takes time and actions, not just words on a screen. It started out like any other Tinder match. I swiped right on a cute brunette named Sarah, who seemed normal enough at first glance. Her profile was pretty sparse, just a few hiking photos and a brief bio saying she enjoyed the outdoors. I figured why not take a chance and send her a message. To my surprise, she wrote back fairly quickly, but her responses were short, just a word or two at a time. I tried to keep the conversation going, asking about her job and interests, but she always steered it back to how much she liked hiking and hanging out in nature. Red flag number one probably should have been how evasive she was about meeting up. I suggested drinks or dinner a few times, but she always had an excuse ready about being too busy with work. After about 2 weeks of brief, stilted messaging back and forth, she finally suggested meeting up for a hike on a nearby trail. I was caught a bit off guard since it was nearly midnight by then, but she insisted it was the only time that week she had free. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the late-night hiking expedition. The day of our hike, Sarah instructed me to meet her at midnight in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse. This should have been major red flag number 2, but I was young and naive, and still hoping for a fun outdoorsy date. I drove out to the deserted industrial park at the appointed time and pulled into the weed-choked parking lot. The whole area was pitch black and deathly silent. Apprehension started creeping up my spine as the minutes ticked by with no sign of Sarah. I messaged her to say I had arrived, but got no response. After nearly an hour of waiting alone in the dark, I attempted to look up her profile again only to find it had completely vanished. No trace of our conversations, her photos or cutesy bio remained. I drove home rattled and confused, unsure if I had been pranked or ghosted. For several days after, I tried to put the bizarre night out of my mind. Then late one evening as I was scrolling absent-mindedly through Tinder, a familiar face popped up. It was Sarah's main hiking photo, but the name on the profile was different. Out of morbid curiosity, I swiped right and matched with her immediately. My message inquiring if she was the same Sarah went unanswered. I became obsessed with figuring out who this mysterious woman was. Through my amateur online sleuthing, I uncovered a news article about a young woman named Sarah who had been murdered at that very warehouse 5 years prior. The crime was still unsolved, but evidence pointed to an online dating encounter gone horribly wrong. Several other men had also reported matching with Sarah only to have her direct them to the abandoned building, but no one else had shown up the nights they were lured there. It all became clear that I had encountered Sarah's lonely, restless spirit still trying to make connections on Tinder. My skin crawls imagining what fate could have befallen me had I crossed paths with her killer that night. To this day, Sarah's profile intermittently surfaces on the app, always with different names attached. Her hiking pictures remain unchanged, tied to her eternal memory of happier times in life. Wary men still obediently travel to the ominous warehouse to fulfill her ominous requests. never knowing how close they come to a sinister end. As for me, the night's events left a permanent mark. I deleted my Tinder account and swore off online dating for good. My brush with the phantom profile was enough to warn me away from the dangers lurking behind virtual companions. Some connections are better left in the past, resting in peace. Or so I thought. A year later, loneliness drove me back to online dating against my better judgment. After a few failed matches, I decided to give Tinder another shot. Swiping through the endless faces one night, I nearly dropped my phone when Sarah appeared once more. An icy shudder ran through me seeing those familiar hiking photos. Though I knew better, I swiped right again, morbidly hoping to get answers about her identity. To my disbelief, we instantly matched for the second time. Before I could even formulate a message, an address popped up from her account, along with instructions to meet there tonight at 9 p.m. My curiosity battled with my caution, but in the end, curiosity won out. I had to know who this person truly was and what she wanted from me. Armed with my phone's GPS, I drove to the mystery address, which turned out to be a small house on the edge of town. The windows were dark inside and no cars sat in the overgrown driveway. Apprehension flooded me and I considered turning back, but couldn't stop now when I was so close to unraveling the truth. I approached the creaking front porch and hesitantly knocked on the weathered door. Several agonizing minutes passed in silence. I had just convinced myself no one was home when the doorknob slowly turned. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a gaunt, pale face I instantly recognized. Sarah stood before me just as in her pictures, hollow-eyed with stringy brown hair. Before I could react, she grasped my wrist with an icy cold hand and yanked me inside. The interior of the house was in shambles, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. Sarah stared at me intently before finally speaking in a paper-thin rasp. "I've been waiting for you. The others never came, but you returned." Confused and terrified, I stammered, What do you want from me?" A chilling smile contorted Sarah's sunken face. "Simply your company. It's so lonely here, you see. Won't you stay a while?" Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I broke away from her grip and fled outside. I sprinted to my car and peeled out down the overgrown driveway. In the rearview mirror, Sarah's emaciated figure stood watching me from the porch, still wearing that knife-sharp smile. I drove home in shock, with the certainty that I had come face to face with something unnatural and sinister. These days, I avoid Tinder and all online dating sites, too rattled by my repeat brushes with the entity claiming to be Sarah. I still catch myself compulsively checking for her profile, both hoping and dreading that I'll see those familiar pictures surface again. Wherever she manifests from, and whatever she truly wants, I know better now than to swipe right on the phantom. Some connections should remain buried in the past, no matter how alluring their lure. For in the harsh light of day, our virtual companions may reveal themselves as something far more sinister. When I first matched with Jake on Tinder, I thought it was a joke. His profile picture looked exactly like me. Same brown hair, same hazel eyes, same smile. For a second, I thought I had accidentally swiped right on my own profile. But no, his name was Jake and he lived across town rather than me. What were the chances we'd look so alike? We started chatting, and the coincidences kept piling up. Jake made the same corny jokes I would make. He used the same weird phrases I say all the time. He even told me about his childhood in northern Michigan, which is exactly where I grew up. I jokingly asked if he was my long-lost twin. He said he felt like we were the same person, just living slightly different lives. I'll admit, it freaked me out a bit how similar we were. But Tinder matches don't always work out, so I figured I'd just chat with him for fun until one of us lost interest. Jake seemed nice enough, but then things started getting strange. He would reference inside jokes I had with friends back home that I'd never told him about. He mentioned my secret love of mint chocolate chip ice cream, which I've never told anyone because I think it's embarrassing to like such a basic flavor. He even knew about the time I spilled grape juice on my favorite white jeans in 7th grade, something I had completely forgotten about until he brought it up. When I asked how he knew these details about me, Jake brushed it off with a joke, but I couldn't let it go. I demanded he tell me the truth. Finally, he confessed, "I know everything about you because I am you. I'm just a version of you that's a bit ahead in life." Then he said some cryptic stuff about parallel universes colliding and how he was here to guide me on my path. I didn't reply after that. Honestly, it freaked me out too much. I unmatched Jake and tried to forget our bizarre chat. But over the next few days, strange notifications started popping up on my phone. It was messages sent from my own Tinder account to other matches. However, I know I didn't send them. It was like someone else had access to my account. The messages this other me sent were eerie. He referenced conversations I had recently had with my matches, conversations I had never told anyone else about. He seemed to know everything about my Tinder chats, even those I had deleted from my message history. It was like he was watching me through my own eyes. When my matches asked who he was, he simply replied, "I'm her, just further ahead," just like Jake had said. I immediately logged out of my Tinder account and reset my password. The creepy messages stopped, but I couldn't shake the paranoid feeling that someone was spying through my eyes. What if Jake really was me, from some twisted future or parallel world? What did he mean about guiding me on my path? Ever since that experience, I've avoided dating apps entirely. The whole thing was just too bizarre and unsettling. I know it sounds crazy, but I just can't risk running into another version of myself again. My friends tell me I'm being ridiculous, that it was just some weird catfishing scheme, but deep down, I believe Jake was telling the truth about us being the same person, and I'm scared to find out what that means for my future. Last night, my fears came flooding back. I was up late watching TV, trying to get my mind off the whole Jake incident. As I was flipping channels, I landed on some old black and white movie. A beautiful woman appeared on the screen, one who looked eerily familiar even in vintage movie glamour. It took me a moment to place her face. She looked exactly like me. I checked the TV Guide channel to see what movie it was. The listing said, "Meant to Be, the story of a timeless love." I had never heard of it before. The woman even had my name, Sarah. As I kept watching, mesmerized, the similarities grew more distinct. Sarah had the same voice, the same mannerisms, even the same unique birthmark on her wrist. The coincidences were too much. It was like watching myself on screen. Eventually, the male lead appeared, an elegant gentleman named Jacob. My heart dropped. He was a spitting image of Jake from Tinder. The two on screen gazed into each other's eyes, professing their eternal love. I grabbed the remote to turn it off, but I couldn't look away. The end credits revealed it was filmed in the 1950s. Sarah, the leading lady, had died tragically young at the age of 25. Perhaps it was foolish, but I became convinced I had found proof of Jake's claims. Sarah was me in a past life. She had found her soulmate in Jacob, just as Jake and I had found each other now. It was meant to be. No one believes me when I tell them about the movie, but I know deep down it confirms everything Jake said. I am on a destined path, and he is my guide. I have to find Jake again on Tinder. We are eternally connected, bound together across space and time. I don't know how, but I know we will be together in the end. Our love has spanned decades and will continue to endure. It was just another regular Saturday night when I decided to open up Tinder and see if there were any interesting women in my area. After swiping for a bit, I came across Amy's profile. She was cute, shoulder-length blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a warm smile. Her bio said she enjoyed hiking, reading historical fiction novels, and trying new restaurants. She seemed down to earth, and I liked that she had a variety of interests, so I swiped right. To my surprise, we matched right away, and she messaged me within a few minutes. We exchanged a few friendly messages, discovering we were both free the next evening. Amy suggested meeting at a local brewery she had been wanting to try, so we made plans to meet there at 7 p.m. I was excited for the date as Amy seemed really sweet, and I was looking forward to getting to know her better. Sunday evening arrived and I got to the brewery a little before 7. There was no sign of Amy yet, so I got us a table and ordered a beer while I waited. Right at 7, Amy walked in. She looked just like her pictures and gave me a bright smile as she came over to the table. We hit it off right away, and conversation flowed easily over the next couple hours. Amy was easy to talk to, and we discovered we had a lot in common, from favorite TV shows to our mutual love of dogs. She was funny and quick-witted, with an infectious laugh that made me laugh too. We ended up closing down the brewery that night. The time had passed so quickly and enjoyably that neither of us had noticed last call. As we walked out to our cars, Amy suggested meeting up again later in the week. I readily agreed, and we exchanged numbers before saying goodnight. On the drive home, I couldn't stop smiling. It had been one of those perfect first dates, and I was really looking forward to seeing Amy again. The next day, I logged into Tinder excited to message Amy about our next date. But when I pulled up my matches, her profile was gone. There was no record of our conversation. Puzzled, I logged out and back in, but still no Amy. I figured it was just a glitch, so I reached out to her via text. The message wouldn't go through. Over the next couple days, I became increasingly disturbed when calling her number simply led to an automated message saying the number was disconnected. I started asking our mutual connections if they knew an Amy who matched her description. The first few people didn't know who I was talking about, but then I got in touch with Steve, who had gone to high school with me. When I mentioned her, he gave me a weird look. "You went on a date with Amy? Dude, she doesn't exist. I was thoroughly confused as Steve went on to explain that Amy was supposedly an alias used by a ring of people in town to set up dates and then rob, scam, or worse, the unsuspecting people who showed up. Some truly believed she was a real person who then disappeared, like I did. But Steve insisted Amy wasn't actually a woman, but rather a made-up online identity used for nefarious purposes. The more I asked around, the more stories I heard that aligned with Steve's claims. Multiple people recounted similar experiences, meeting an Amy from Tinder, having an amazing first date, and then having her vanish without a trace. Described as sweet, funny, and loving dogs in historical fiction. Her pictures were always consistent, but in person, no one could say for sure who she really was, or if they had even met the same woman. I started looking back on our date, racking my brain for any odd details or red flags I may have overlooked. The brewery had been her suggestion. Was that on purpose to avoid somewhere more familiar to me? Our conversation revolved mostly around me. Had she deflected any personal questions about her own life or background? Try as I might, I couldn't pinpoint anything concrete. She had seemed totally normal and genuine the whole night. If it was an act, it was a masterful one. The whole situation terrified me. Who was I really out with that night? What would have happened if we had gone somewhere more private? I kept reliving our date in my mind, looking for any subtle hints as to her true intentions, but I couldn't recall anything that raised alarm bells in the moment. She, or whoever she was perfectly charming and normal the entire time. I found myself repeatedly looking over my shoulder when I was out, unable to shake the uneasy feeling I was being watched. My friends wrote it off as me being paranoid, but I couldn't help it. The disappearing act, the possibly fake identity, the mysterious warnings, it all left me feeling like I was part of something bigger and more sinister than I realized. I considered going to the police, but I had no evidence a crime had actually been committed. All I had was speculation and stories, nothing concrete tying this Amy and whomever she really was to anything illegal. The police would likely just dismiss it as an odd situation and leave it at that. But I remained convinced something more was going on in my town, hidden beneath the everyday pleasant surface. While I'll never know the full truth behind Amy and the multiple people who posed as her, the experience taught me you can't always trust who someone appears to be online. I removed myself from Tinder and other dating apps after that night. It just wasn't worth the risk anymore. Who knows what someone's real motivations are behind their charming smile and thoughtful bio? I prefer to meet people the old-fashioned way now, through trusted friends or at local events around town. At least then I feel more confident they are who they claim to be. But I still find myself searching faces in a crowd or looking down dark streets, wondering if one of them is the Amy I met that night, and what their intentions really were. The not knowing is almost worse than the truth. I may never shake the uneasy feeling that came from my vanished date.